like Alex said, we're going to talk about Peter Homberg because he was really cool, man, and we're going to miss him. But here to talk about it is the partner at gunnercooke. She knew him a long time and knew him really well. Can we hear it for Judith Heimbürger? Make some noise.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good morning. For those who do not know what gunnercooke is doing, we are a law firm, an international law firm. And I apologize because this is going to be emotional for me. Because this keynote is dedicated to a person, to a man who should have been standing here himself. Before we look ahead, I want to take this moment to honor a man who was a true pioneer of the legal cannabis field, a brilliant lawyer, and a remarkable human being, Peter Homberg. My esteemed colleague, mentor, boss, and friend passed away on 4th December unexpectedly. I'm still struggling to grasp that he's no longer with us. The loss, the shock, the sadness, it's still very present. And my deepest sympathy goes out to his wife and son who lost the person they loved most. And Peter had a rare gift. He brought people together and kept them united. His energy, his warmth, his humor, his passion, they filled every room he entered. He was someone who believed in people, who pushed them, who helped them grow beyond what they thought is possible. Loyalty meant everything to him, and he lived it every day. Those who earned his trust know they had an extraordinary person by their side. Attentive, generous, funny, and always ready with good advice. Few people have shaped the transformation of legal cannabis markets in Germany as deeply as Peter did. Since the legalization of medical cannabis in 2017, he became one of the defining faces of this industry, far beyond Germany's or European market. Some affectionately called him Mr. Cannabis. Others joked he was the Richard Gere of the legal field. And honestly, he carried both titles with the same mix of charm, confidence, and humility. But to understand the magnitude of his contribution, we have to remember what 2017 felt like. Back then, saying cannabis in a business meeting led to raised eyebrows, awkward smiles, or outright dismissal. But Peter walked straight into this discomfort. As a partner at an international law firm, he chose the harder path. He swam against the current when it would have been so much easier to stay silent. While others entered the industry out of opportunism and avoided the spotlight, Peter stepped into it. He became one of the most visible advocates and architects of the legal transformation. He stood on stages before Parliament, gave interviews, and never hesitated to tie his professional reputation to an industry that was still fighting for legitimacy. He embodied the spirit of a legal cannabis economy like almost no one else. And his achievements won't fade. They will remain in my daily work, in expert reports, in articles and interviews, and maybe in the laws still to come. And in the future, when Germany's cannabis industry is thriving, we will look back and remember that Peter was one of the first who dared to build this bridge. Peter also had an extraordinary instinct for the cannabis market. If you remember, last year at this ICBC, he stood on that very stage and asked the audience, who knows the name Nina Wagen? And then he said, with this unmistakable confidence of his, remember that name, there's something to come. And he was right. In the spirit of that intuition and in the very spirit of his forward-looking vision, we will now turn our attention to the future, to the proposed amendments of the Medicinal Cannabis Act in Germany, the MedCanG, which was introduced by Germany's Federal Minister of Health, Nina Wagen. And it's this evolving legal framework, this next chapter, that Peter foresaw and that he was so passionate about shaping. Peter would not have wanted us to retreat into grief or let sadness hold us back. He would have wanted us to carry his vision forward with the same courage, clarity, and passion that defined him. I had the honor of working with him for more than 13 years now, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm afraid it took some time, so I'm afraid I won't have the time to go through all of that. But if you want to talk about the current developments, you can also come to our booth 605 and we can discuss it here. So I will just focus on the most important points, which are essential for understanding the current developments and Peter's vision. So the background of the draft bill is quite easily to summarize. There was an observation of the Ministry of Health that there was a mismatch between the increase of import quantities of medical cannabis and the prescriptions to the expense of statutory health insurances. And so they had two conclusions. The first was the high number of self-payers, that's unusual for Germany, and that there might be a potential misuse of cannabis prescriptions due to, in particular, online platforms, because they say on these online platforms, the prescriptions are received mostly based on questionnaires, and that's not legally possible for German doctors. So there are mostly non-German doctors from other European countries who prescribe cannabis. And then this cannabis will be sent to the patient without a personal contact to the pharmacist. And they say there might be the problem that there might be no direct contact between the patient and the doctor or the patient and the pharmacy. So the solution they suggested is that prescriptions cannot be prescribed over telemedical platforms anymore because there must be an in-person contact, and medical cannabis should not be sent per mail order anymore. So the changes they proposed, they relate to two areas: how cannabis can be prescribed and how cannabis can be redeemed. The draft says that cannabis flowers may only be prescribed, as I said, due to personal contact with a prescribing physician, and also repeated prescriptions require a personal contact within the last 4 quarters with the same physician, that's important, or a physician of the same office. And with regard to the redeem of prescriptions, it should only be possible via local pharmacies or via the courier service of this local pharmacy, but it's very restricted in Germany, so it has to be a courier service of this pharmacy and only in a very restricted area. I will skip the third part, and the status of this bill is currently discussed in the Bundestag's committees. And the Social Democrats, who are part of the governing coalition, they request significant adjustments towards a more balanced approach and that's why it's not. We expect that the law will come into effect as it is proposed right now. As you may have heard, there is an independent scientific evaluation, the second interim report, ECOCAN. This is mandated by law, but it's about the legalization of recreational cannabis. But since the two markets are interconnected, this report also dedicated a chapter on medical cannabis. Telemedical platforms are there addressed as well. However, unlikely the Ministry of Health, their report says that there should be no restriction of access to legal cannabis because it said it would hinder the transformation of the cannabis market. Instead, they propose to make some THC-related regulatory adjustments and stricter enforcement of existing pharmaceutical advertising bans. What not only Peter criticized with regard to the proposed amendments is that a complete ban of telemedicine would make access to medical cannabis therapy greatly complicated for many serious ill or rural patients. And Germany already has a comprehensive legal framework. Also, the ban of mail order sales is unjustified. There are already sufficient stipulations regarding counseling and information of patients of the pharmacist. So we had some alternative proposals when this act comes out. And the alternative solution Peter had in mind would clarify existing provisions while achieving the same goals as the Ministry of Health wanted without restricting patient access. I will just pick out the centerpiece of Peter's vision. It's the second point, to subject medical cannabis platforms to the requirement of obtaining a cannabis authorization pursuant to Section 4 MedCanG. Why did Peter think this would be a better solution? The Federal Institute for Drugs and Medical Devices, the BfArM, is the competent authority for such applications. And within this application process, it would have the chance to check whether the platform is in compliance with German law, with advertising laws, and with regard to the agreements with the physicians and the pharmacies. Therefore, supervision, transparency, and accountability across the medical cannabis market would be strengthened without restricting patient access. What would be the legal and practical impact of the alternative solution Peter envisioned? Telemedicine would remain an important pillar of the cannabis healthcare system. Operators of telemedical platforms seeing German patients would be based in Germany because only German companies can apply for a MedCanG license. And the cooperating doctors would have to abide to German law. There would be no prescription based solely on online questionnaires because that's not legally compliant for German doctors. And video consultation would become the new normal for telemedicine. There would be no impact on access to medical cannabis through mail order delivery by specialized pharmacies. So, in summary, the federal government's draft law intends to prohibit exclusive telemedical treatment with cannabis and mail order delivery. The Social Democrats have not gathered behind the draft and request significant amendments towards a more balanced approach. The ECOCAN second interim report also explicitly mentions the role of telemedical platforms, but aims for a different approach, THC-related content and enforcement of existing advertising law. Subject telemedical cannabis platforms to the requirement of a cannabis authorization would give the state control over their compliance with the regulatory framework without restricting legitimate patient interests. So the coming weeks and months will show whether Peter's vision of a less intrusive, more appropriate, and legally more effective solution will resonate with lawmakers and eventually find its way into future amendments of the MedCanG, allowing his legacy to live on with the legal framework itself. Thank you.